Welcome everyone to today's Alum Zoom. My name is Melissa Bostrom and I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development in the Graduate School. And I'm delighted to host today's event in collaboration with the Office of Postdoctoral Services and the Duke Career Center. And thank you so much to Molly Starbeck, who is waving, the Office of Postdoctoral Services Director, who is my co-host today. We are delighted to feature today Dr. Davide Carozza, who is Director of Federal Grants at After School AllStars. And if I can keep my screen going, I will introduce him. There we go. He received his Bachelor of Arts in English and Mathematics from Williams College, then worked as a mathematics teacher at St. Albans School in Washington, D.C. for 2 years before coming to graduate school at Duke. And he graduated in 2020, just in time for the pandemic to hit. So let me tell you a little bit of what Davide did while he was at Duke. He was involved in several different endeavors. He worked at the Rubenstein Library, helping to organize, catalog, and preserve the Marcus Garvey collection, one of the largest archives on the Jamaican political activist in the world. He also designed and taught a class on sports writing, for which he placed in the top 5% of student evaluations across all professors and instructors at Duke, and he won a teaching award for that course. I got to know Davide when he served as a dean's administrative intern in the graduate school, where some of his work involved interviewing prominent alumni and tracking career outcomes for our PhD graduates. His own professional path since graduating has come into focus at After School AllStars, a national nonprofit organization where his work as a grant writer and development officer has helped to secure over $2.5 million in funding at a time when the organization has had to cut staff due to COVID-19. As of May 17th, he is the Director of Federal Grants at After School AllStars. So please join me in a warm virtual welcome for the freshly promoted Dr. Davide Carozza. We're so glad to have you today. So for the audience members, for the audience members, we're going to begin with our 5 career questions that we ask all our guests and then move on to address questions that came in through the registration. Please feel free to post questions in the chat or even come off mute to ask a follow-up question if you'd like. You can use the raise hand feature also if you would prefer to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Davide, could you tell us about your background?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks everyone for coming. It's really nice to see a lot of familiar faces. I miss Durham, and I'm actually going to be back soon for my first trip out of DC in over a year, so I'm excited about that. My background. So, yeah, I have an interdisciplinary background. My undergraduate degrees, as mentioned, were in mathematics and English, so I was always looking for a way to sort of meld those interests and continue to have a foot in both worlds. And at Duke, I did that through my dissertation research, which was about the history of risk management. Risk management is the concept that emerges, broadly speaking, in the 18th century, and it explodes in this incredible way. It all happens at once. So many of the things that make up the modern world are invented in this incredibly condensed period of time. So national banks and insurance companies and stock markets and the first stock market bubble, all this stuff happens in this incredibly condensed period of time, which happens to also be the moment when the English novel comes into existence. And the rise of the English novel is rarely told as part of that story, and yet it has deep connections to those other things. So that was what always intrigued me, that ability to sort of think through a problem that allowed me to engage my left brain, right brain interests simultaneously. And Duke was a really wonderful place to do that with a really incredible and vibrant intellectual community. Since then, I've gotten into the nonprofit space, and we'll talk a lot about that, I think, in subsequent questions. It was rather unexpected. It was completely pandemic driven. So yeah, but that's me in a nutshell.
Terrific. All right, so let's fast forward a little bit. Tell us how you got your job at After School AllStars.
Yes, so this is the fun part. So I defended I defended March 31st, 2020 and finished in April 2020, and thought I had a job waiting for me after graduation, and then it no longer existed because of the pandemic. So I was in the interesting position of having an expiring lease, no job, no particular place to go, and trying to start a job search from scratch during this, which was not great. So I did the only thing that sort of seemed reasonable at the time, and I put all my stuff in storage, moved to DC because that's where I'm from. My family is all here. Most of my friends are still here, and just started looking for work in the middle of a global pandemic. And though it was not a fun process, I actually learned a lot along the way about things that I think will be helpful, hopefully to all of you, especially if you're interested in being in DC. There's a lot of uniquely DC things we can talk about if that is of interest. So to make ends meet, when I first got back here, I started working as a freelance writer. It was something I could do immediately to help money come in. And immediately, most of my clients were people who wanted grants written. There's a huge need in the nonprofit space for people who can write really compelling narrative to make people understand programming, understand the value of different nonprofit initiatives, and they just don't have capacity in-house to do that. So all my clients were people who wanted me to write grants. It was not on my radar as a thing that even existed, much less a thing I would be good at. And yet I found that my graduate school training prepared me perfectly, because grant writing is essentially close reading and then writing responses that are tailored to specific audiences. In other words, if you're in graduate school, there's a decent chance you're really good at that, right? So when you read a proposal, they're not always written in ways that it's immediately apparent what exactly it is they're after. So the ability to close read and think about what it is they might be getting at, even if they haven't said it entirely clearly, is incredibly helpful. And then to be able to craft a proposal that responds very carefully to those cues. I mean, it's the difference in a lot of money. It just is. I was shocked how much of a difference I made as a freelance grant writer working for organizations I was meeting for the first time. We raised so much money so quickly. And eventually one of the organizations for whom I had been writing said, hey, can we soak up more of your time? And so I started working essentially exclusively for one organization, doing their development work. So my job was to go out, find grant opportunities, write the grants, get them approved by the executive team, and send them out into the world. And within my first year of doing that, I raised $2.5 million for a small organization. So it's essentially 3 years of their operating budget that I was able to raise, which was pretty incredible. So that did, however, not solve my fundamental issue, which was some desire to know what the heck my life was going to look like long term. And so I started asking them, like, hey, what's the deal here? Like, I can't be doing this. I'm dramatically underemployed. Is there like a long-term path here? And eventually, when I was taking interviews with other places and thinking about leaving as sort of the pandemics finally started to thaw and people were hiring again once you hit 2021, I let them know I was interviewing, and suddenly they said, hey, would you consider staying on with us full time? And they moved me from their DC satellite office to their national office, which is also in DC, but nevertheless, I'm technically on a different team now with a much bigger budget, and they made me a director. I'm director of federal grants. So I went from having sort of no idea what my life would look like to having this really fantastic job here in DC, which they've even agreed to accommodate adjunct teaching. So I'm really excited because I'm going to be doing this full time, but starting in this fall, I'm going to be an adjunct instructor at Georgetown. So after a long period of my life sort of being in chaos, things are finally coming together, and I'm really excited about that.
That is a thrilling story, and I'm so glad it has this really happy, not ending, but midpoint in your career that you can share with us right now. Can you tell us a little bit about a typical day at your organization, if you have a sense of that, pre and maybe currently in COVID?
Yeah. So for the nonprofit space in general, but particularly for After School's AllStars, what they do is in the name, right? COVID was a huge shift in everything for them. They typically get all of their funding through contracts directly with schools to provide after-school services to disadvantaged children. DC, as you guys may know, has a notoriously horrible public school system. I can speak to that firsthand. I'm a product of DC public schools, and though I'm very proud to have done that and stayed in the public school system in DC, the problems are real. And After School AllStars works with the most disadvantaged kids in the city to provide them academic support and various kinds of enrichment activities, which meant that all their money disappeared once you could no longer offer in-person programming, and all their contracts with schools had to be shifted to virtual, and they had to renegotiate all that, and it was a massive blow to their budget and their model, their entire model. So what they had to do is shift entirely to a virtual after-school system that is still in place now. That at first was obviously a huge blow to the organization. It is now proven to be a really incredible opportunity for the organization. The amount of money that is floating around right now for nonprofits to soak up because of the pandemic is staggering, right? It's federal money from things like the American Rescue Plan. It's all sorts of foundations that have stepped up their giving because they want to make sure that they give at the moment when the money is going to be most helpful. It's local government stuff. It's everywhere. Suddenly, there's all this money for nonprofits, which is one of the reasons why they are really stepping up their efforts to recruit development people. I never saw myself in development as a field. It wasn't on my radar, and it is a pretty stressful. It's pretty stressful in the sense that you're never done. If you raise a lot of money, they say, "Great, go raise more." There's no end point to it, and yet it's a really great time right now to be in that line of work. So, after school, AllStars shifted all their programming to a virtual model. It's really incredible. They still do all the things they were doing before, career exploration, where they bring kids on field trips. It's just now that they're virtual field trips, and homework tutoring and subject matter tutoring and all sorts of incredible enrichment activities and all sorts of things they never even did before. Like, they're now a food security organization. Like, they've secured all this money to distribute food to needy families in DC. They've won a huge grant through Best Buy to give kids computers, because a lot of kids didn't have a computer and couldn't do virtual school when the pandemic started. Like, it's just the scope of what the organization does has dramatically expanded, and they're finding that there really is money out there to support these incredible initiatives.
That's fantastic. That's so exciting. What a gift to be a part of that positive movement in the world.
Yeah.
So for the folks who are on the call with us today, graduate students and postdocs who are interested in the nonprofit space generally, and perhaps interested in fundraising and grant writing specifically, what can they be doing now to prepare for this field?
Yeah. So there's a few suggestions. I'm gonna start by talking about grant writing specifically, and then I'll talk about sort of the DC world more broadly, because there's a lot that is DC specific that you can be doing right now. The good news is, for grant writing, you're going to find a pretty easy sell at first, in the sense that the writing skills are needed, right? One of the reasons, I'd love to attribute all of the success my organizations have had to, me personally, but the truth of the matter is that part of this is that they're hurting for people who can actually write. And so an organization that does have someone in-house who can craft compelling proposals is at a significant advantage over other nonprofit organizations. That's going to be great for lots of people on this call, presumably. It's the research side that you could dig into right now and give yourself a serious leg up. There is, if anyone's interested, drop me a line. I'm happy to be more specific, but there's a host of webinars and trainings you can do online, for example, that prepare you for the prospecting world. Prospecting is a world unto itself. Basically, going out and finding people who will give you money is not easy. The research component of it is dramatically underestimated. Like, when they first pitched it to me as, "Oh, you'll be good at this because you can do research," I kind of scoffed. I was like, I'm not sure that looking on online databases all day is research. No, it's research. You have to dig into tax forms and look at historical cycles of when things open and close, and what kind of organizations get funded and at what level, and figure out from that information, okay, extrapolate, is this a reasonable ask? Do I actually think they'll give me this money or not? There's a lot of legwork to be done to find high quality fundraising opportunities. But this is all stuff that graduate students are going to be so good at, right? If you can dig into the minutia and from that extract the important information, and then say, hey, we're going to be really competitive for this grant. Let me tell you why. And then write that grant, and write it much better than even the executive director of the organization could. It's going to really work. So if you're interested in that, in the broadest sense, my advice is very simple, especially if you want to be in DC. Pick any cause that matters to you. Honestly, pick any cause that matters to you. There's a host of nonprofits here that are doing it. figure out which ones are expanding their development team right now. The answer is a whole lot of them. A whole lot of them are hiring development people right now. So you can almost organize your job search that way. Just do it by the cause that, sort of most moves you. And I think you will find that there's appetite for that here. And I'm happy to help if you want anyone to look at resumes, materials, whatever the case might be. In terms of sort of DC more broadly, not just if you're into the nonprofit world, have a federal version of your resume. I wish I had done this much earlier. Federal resumes are nothing like academic CVs and nothing even like normal job resumes. They are insanely long. Put everything you have ever done on your federal resume. Make a case that everything you've ever done on a federal resume is extremely important. It doesn't matter how trivial it seems to you at the time. Don't let it seem trivial on that federal resume. Federal jobs work such that people are checking boxes, right, on a grid to say, oh, you do have this, you don't have that. It's extremely formulaic. There's not a lot of human interpretation involved. But luckily, it's totally standard for a federal resume to have it be 5+ pages. You don't have to keep it to 2. So start to think about how every project you've ever undertaken as a graduate student, a postdoc, anything you've done in academia or even before academia, could be geared as, I was on this team, I did this project, it led to this desirable outcome. And you'll start to see that if you list things on your resume in that way, you might have a very long and very impressive looking resume by the time you're done. And it's going to help. I had job interviews for all sorts of places that I never would have imagined. I had job interviews at NIH. I have no science training of any kind, but they did think that I would have the ability to take technical documents and rewrite them for lay audiences, which actually would have been a very interesting job. I had multiple interviews at FEMA. FEMA does a massive amount of interdisciplinary work. For anyone who's interested in that, I never would have known, but FEMA is looking for interdisciplinary problem solvers because they're this massive, sprawling organization that the scope of what they do is incredible. I have lots of FEMA contacts if that is actually of interest to people. And then I actually interviewed for a number of political jobs, including political jobs in grant writing, which you wouldn't think would exist, but there are congressional members who keep grant writers in staff to help constituents who are looking to fundraise in their districts. So have your eye on the federal government broadly and have your eye on having materials for those kind of jobs ready to go so you don't have to put them together at the last second. A lot of those jobs you can find through usajobs.gov. So it's great because there's a massive repository of federal jobs. I mean, thousands and thousands of jobs with all kinds of filters you can apply about where you want to be geographically and what kind of hours you want to work. So if you haven't looked at usajobs.gov, absolutely do it. But also try to reach out to people directly if you have any contacts at any kind of agency, because the federal hiring process is unbelievably slow, right? I got offered a bunch of federal jobs so far after I interviewed for them that I assumed they were not interested in me. And no, it was just that's how slow the process was. And by that time I'd taken a job in the private sector and that was that. So give yourself lead time, start applying to those jobs now, and you'll find that I know someone in DC who was offered a job a year and a half after they applied for it. But yeah, start building your federal resume, start looking at USA Jobs, start seeing what kind of stuff is out there. And if you have any contacts at agencies where you'd be interested in working, reach out to them because they can shortcut to a lot of that process for you.
That is terrific. Let me pause here and see if anybody has a follow-up question. That was a lot of wonderful information. I'm also posting in the chat a link to an upcoming webinar on how to navigate USA Jobs, the website that Davide was mentioning, because it is a very kind of specific process of preparing your resume and using that website to search. Well, I have a quick follow-up question for you, Davide. You mentioned that when you got started, you were doing some freelance writing. And so I wondered, how did you find those opportunities? Were there particular websites that you looked at?
Yeah, yes, I did sort of start in the most basic and uninspired way imaginable, which was I used LinkedIn and I used Google to look for people who were looking for temporary writing. Once you get in the door, though, then it's mostly word of mouth. So what actually happened is that I won a grant. And once I won my first grant, then suddenly people started coming to me, which was nice. But yeah, trust me, if you put on LinkedIn that you're a freelance writer, or especially if you're a grant writer, there's going to be all sorts of people. Many of them are not going to be willing to pay you, mind you, right? They're going to be inquiring whether you ever give your services away for free, which is an interesting thing to navigate itself. I don't obviously recommend that, but if you wanted to do some small amount of grant writing for free so that you could prove you could do it, it might help. But yeah, I used things like LinkedIn, I used things like Google. I used every connection I could possibly imagine, right? Once I got in the door with one nonprofit, I was like, hey, let me know if you know of other clients, potential clients. And for a time when it didn't look like full-time employment was ever going to start hiring again, I actually contemplated making that my real thrust, right? Work for myself, not have to work for anyone else. But constantly finding clients it wasn't for me. I know some people are all about that entrepreneurial lifestyle. More credit to them. I didn't have it in me. So yeah. Sarah. Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, since you sort of started mentioning it, well, this is really interesting, and congratulations on all the money that you've been getting and helping the DC schools. That's really exciting work. I guess, yeah, I've thought about the grant writing, and I consider myself not I like don't want to talk about money to anybody. I'm like really terrible at it. But so what? How do you do that? Like, how do you? And also, I've seen all these opportunities. Like, people are just asking you to do it for free. Like, when you're freelance grant writing, how do you set your rates? Like, do you get a cut, or do they offer you money, or is it hourly? Or
that's a great question. I will say another thing you can learn from my mistakes: do not undervalue yourself. Look, if you're going to bring in, okay, part of it, of course, is specific to this moment. Like, I happened to start during the pandemic when all this money was being thrown around. I'm sure that it's not going to be that way forever. With that said, given the amount of money I brought in, yeah, charge a high hourly rate, right? Let them know. Also, there is this sort of paradoxical thing, which is the higher your hourly rate is, the more people assume you're really good at what you do. So you might find that you're hesitant to say like, oh yeah, I definitely bill at $50 an hour. Honestly, in DC, $50 an hour is low. Okay, like, don't be afraid to tell people like, this is what my time costs because I'm really good at this. I can do this in a way that you probably can't do yourself. I started at very low hourly rates. I was also working with nonprofits. It depends who your clients are. I've now come up with a very differential system. I wrote the marketing materials for a crypto hedge fund. Let me tell you, I charged the crypto hedge fund a whole lot of money to write their marketing materials because they're a hedge fund. And if there's like anything good about hedge funds, it's that they can maybe shuffle some of their money to people like us. So you're right. It's a process. It is kind of scary to think like, I'm just going to tell people this is what my time costs. But I would encourage you to really think about a number at which you actually want to do that work. And I don't think you need to settle for a number that's substantially below that.
Thanks.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to talk specifically, I'm happy to tell you, like which clients I've worked with and how much I charge them. So.
Thank you. That is so kind of you. So I think we've kind of already addressed the last question that we usually ask people: what's the employment outlook for this field? Because of the vast number of resources that are available and circulating right now. Somebody did ask in the registration, what skills did you obtain and develop during your PhD that best prepared you for your current job? I think you've talked a little bit about this, but I wondered if you wanted to add anything to that answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, close reading. I was sort of shocked at how perfectly it fit onto what I'm doing. Writing for different audiences, all things we do, research. But if I want to point to something beyond sort of all of those, I will say that. So, for example, when after school AllStars, where I went from literally being like dramatically underemployed on contract-based work to the director of federal grants, despite having absolutely no background in government whatsoever. It's the abstract thinking, and it's the ability to to sort of, it's the strategic thinking that happens at a high level for these organizations, right? While obviously the content I'm learning as I go, and it's often drinking water out of a fire hose, the ability to manage it is really not that dissimilar from your ability to put together any kind of long-term complex project that you're working on, right? That's where I think if you're going to sell yourself to people in interviews, don't undersell that aspect of it. Like, people get impressed when you talk about your dissertation. I'm amazed at how many of my interviews people actually wanted to know about my dissertation. I assumed it would be esoteric and certainly not of interest to people just hiring in the private sector. No, people on this call are here because you're really good at what you do. You didn't just happen to decide to do this, right? It's a long haul. If you let them know that, let them know I have managed a really complex project from start to finish. I've had to do it while managing lots of expectations, right? There are other stakeholders in this project. You have committee members. Welcome to, dealing with any kind of complex organizational structure. Don't undersell how you've built skills that are going to play really, really well, even in a corporate environment. And think a lot about that. Think about that very strategically as you prepare for interviews. Think about how you can basically say, everything I've done in academia maps onto the stuff you're looking for. The content stuff, I promise you I can learn it. I promise you I'm going to learn it really fast because I'm smart. I'm really good at this. I promise you I can pick up the content. It's everything else that I'm already bringing to the table that you're going to want. It's going to be, it is a sales pitch, but it's going to work. People are going to, not everyone, some people are going to say, no, we want people with specific professional experience in this field. But I've been really encouraged by the number of people with whom I interviewed for whom, like, yeah, we totally understand that skill set and we see how it's going to be really valuable to us.
That was so compelling. Thank you. I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience.
I have a quick question.
Hey, Karen.
Hi, it's so good to see you. And also I'm so happy that this is how things are going for you.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, also I'm learning a ton, so thank you so much for doing this.
Sure.
I was wondering, so, one thing that I find is I recently had to apply for one of those summer internships. I think a couple of people here have done those, and I realized that, oh my God, I have not written a a non-academic kind of application in so long. I used to do this all the time, but it's how did you, at the end of the PhD, just being so deeply entrenched in academic applications and just the way that academics interact, which is so different from other office settings, and the language you use to sell yourself. And you've been telling us a little bit what kind of language to use, but how did you move from that mindset to how did you transition into the non-academic speak? What kind of things helped you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's a great question, and definitely something that I learned by doing. So I wasn't very good at it at the beginning. I really struggled to explain to people why my academic training was valuable without basically saying, let's talk about these things in unbelievably theoretical, abstract ways that probably are of no interest to you, right? But what I eventually grabbed onto, that I think you can start sort of turning over in your mind, is that okay, your language and your tone are going to change. You're not writing for an academic audience, but what's really valuable that they lack is the ability to put the pieces in the right place, right? It's really about the structure. That is the thing, whether it's in a job interview or writing grants. People who don't do the things we do or have done for a long time often have trouble bringing the kind of clarity that even when they're trying to express what it is they want or are looking for, it's often put to you in incredibly impressionistic ways that aren't immediately apparent. Your ability to distill that and to tell them, this is what I hear you saying, right, is they're gonna be like, yes, thank you, yes. And that's the moment you're looking for. So I would say, yeah, do go in a little bit. You're not going to show off the full range of your intellect immediately, right? That's not the goal. The goal is not to write a journal article for them and say, look, this is really smart, right? The goal is to actually make it as broadly accessible as possible. But you do want to find yourself constantly in a position of saying, I see, I hear in what you're saying these desires, here is how I meet them, and I see in your organization these places where I know I can bring value. And it's really that level of sort of, like I said, it's like a formalism of a certain kind, right? It's like a structural question. That's what they're looking for. That's what they often are lacking. That's what I'm reading. So when I started writing grants, I was reading a lot of grants that they had written before me, and nothing changed about the programming. The programming was always fantastic, but the grants were terrible because it wasn't clear why one sentence connected to the next sentence, and certainly not why one paragraph connected to the next paragraph, right? Like that level of basic organizational stuff, we can fix that immediately for them. Think about it in those terms, and it might be helpful.
I have kind of a broader question for Davide. Just in terms of like your transition away from academia and towards the nonprofit sector, I mean, have you found the kind of position you found yourself in right now, intellectually fulfilling in the way that perhaps your academic pursuits would have otherwise done? I mean, you mentioned obviously that you're still going to be teaching on a kind of a part-time basis, but I just wasn't sure on a day-to-day kind of like, does it feel satisfying? Does it feel rewarding? Does it feel like you're getting to sort of, employ the full range of your academic abilities in the way that you might have otherwise have done had you stuck on the academic track long term, I guess?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And the answer is, to be honest, is a mixed bag, right? Do I find reading, bills written in Congress or RFPs written by various kinds of funding sources as intriguing and sort of as moving as reading the stuff I was reading in academia? No, of course not. The writing, though, this is something I've been really pleased to learn. The writing is still really enjoyable. Yeah, the minutia of it, the day-to-day, no, I'd much rather be reading even a dense theoretical text than I would, a bill from Congress, try to figure out if there's an earmark in it for an organization that I can, ask for money. That's not what I want to do. But the writing, it is that's sort of the thing that has kept me really happy in what I'm doing, because these people, they're not always used to the level of writing that we could bring. They really aren't, and they are going to be very appreciative and very impressed, and they're going to give you time and space to craft it. And that's where I find the intellectual stimulation coming from. I'm still crafting writing in a way that I've written some stuff that I'm pretty proud of. And the content is radically different from anything I would have imagined ever writing. But when I read, I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, I'm happy to have written that. So.
Davide, if you're okay, I think Sarah had a question as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. So Ben, I guess is your name Ben, because I can't really tell. Ask kind of along the lines of what I was gonna ask, which is where do you see, like, you're going to be adjuncting? Are you still kind of positioning yourself for academia, or are you thinking about going corporate, or like what's your? Are you just kind of happy to be where you are right now?
So I'm. That's obviously a question that's on my mind. I, to be perfectly honest, I'll get back to you. So the issue here is that I need to see how viable this is this fall, when I'm teaching in the evenings at Georgetown while also working a full-time job where I'm technically director of a division. And luckily they haven't started me managing people right away, but the idea is that a year from now I'm going to have my own team and I'm going to run the team. When I'm doing that, is it going to be plausible to teach in the evenings? We'll find out. I will say this. I took this job after it took me almost a year to get through the pandemic to actually have full-time offers. And then when they started coming, suddenly there was more than one. I took this job out of the variety of full-time offers I finally had after a year of looking, because they agreed to accommodate adjunct teaching. So like, it was part of the process. They know it. Everyone knows it. So I'm hopeful that is a long-term viable configuration. but I can't actually tell you that right now. And I'm happy to, like I said, I really want to help in any way I can. So I'm happy to stay in touch with anyone who has any questions about anything I talk about here today. And even if that just means like, hey, come August 25th, let me know if you're still alive. Like, I'm happy to talk to people. Yeah, it'd be my pleasure.
Thanks.
I think that is just a wonderful way to wrap up today's conversation. Davide, you've just been provided a wealth of great ideas and ways to frame our skills that we bring to the table as grad students and postdocs and alumni. And we want to thank you so much for this terrific conversation. Please join me in a round of applause.
Thank you all very much. I really enjoyed it. It was great to see a lot of familiar faces. I am going to be in Durham this weekend. For those of you I know, quite a few of you, if you want to meet, let's talk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody, for being a part of today's conversation. Take care, everyone.
Bye.